بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. Welcome inshallah to lesson 6 of Fiqh al-Shafi'i, reading from Matn Abi Shuja with a commentary. Inshallah today we hope to finish off Kitab al-Tahara, looking at al-Najasa, legal filth, menstruation, postnatal bleeding and irregular bleeding, but at a level 1 or within a level 1 context. So there will be some detail left off, particularly when dealing with menstruation and irregular bleeding. There's a lot of detail in that subject, so inshallah we intend to dedicate an independent class just for that. طيب. So looking at al-Najasa, filth within the Sharia is any substance that is impermissible to consume. But the reason why it is impermissible to consume is not due to it being sacred or haram to consume, or in such a situation where, meaning it's haram for you to consume, but not because of its sanctity, not because of a situation where one can distinguish between it and something pure. Because you may have a situation, of course, where let's say there's a type of insect that is within an apple and one is unable to identify this haram substance, this impermissible substance to consume within something which is permissible. The Sharia overlooks these sorts of things because it's so difficult. But if there is a situation where one can distinguish, then that thing would be haram and impermissible to consume. So not for that reason either, nor is it impermissible due to being disgusting necessarily, nor due to its causing harm to the body or mind. So it's haram to consume glass, for example, but not because it's not for any other reason except that it's harmful. Meaning as a substance it's not impure, but because it will cause harm to the body, it's impermissible. So none of these reasons are the reasons why najasa is haram. Filth is something which is impermissible to consume for other than these reasons, not for these reasons. The point of really mentioning this is to give it an independent reason for being impermissible. But it's not impermissible for any other reason, it's impermissible because it is filth. So now that becomes the definition of a najasa or filth itself. Something which is impermissible to consume, not due to these reasons, but its own reason, that it is filth. A few general rules, just to give some context. In the Shafi'i school, filth cannot be removed except through water. This is unlike in the Hanafi school, where as long as the physical filth is removed, it may be removed by any means. The objective is just the zawal of that najasa, the removal of that najasa. In the Shafi'i school, water is a condition, it must be with water. Now, how many times one uses water, how do they use that water? This all depends on the type of filth. We're going to look at it in a very broad sense shortly, of 3 categories of najasa. There are different categorizations depending on what you're talking about, but we are going to speak about it particularly in the context of removing that filth and the process of purification. And of course each madhab, each school has its own evidences based upon its own legal paradigm. It is also obligatory to avoid being afflicted or furthering the spread of filth except due to necessity. An example is finishing urinating properly and ensuring all urine has exited. So it's haram, it's impermissible for one to afflict oneself with something which is filthy, shar'an, legally considered as filth, or to further the spread of that filth. So this example is very, very important because it's daily. That because we have to avoid droplets of urine, then it's important to ensure that one has completely finished properly, and that there is that we have tried to the best of our ability to make sure that no droplets will fall out afterwards. Some scholars have mentioned coughing, etc., or even applying a small amount of pressure using one's hand to make sure that that has cleared, to use water afterwards to remove waswasa, satanic whisperings of doubt and OCD, etc. Imam al-Ghazali mentions that it's important not to become fascinated and to overcomplicate it, but that one coughs a few times just to ensure that they have tried to remove any droplets. But it comes from this principle that one is not allowed to afflict oneself with filth or to further its spread. So there are three main kinds that we want to talk about, because this is a context of removing filth. So there's different ways that we can categorize filth. Sometimes a filth can be mar'i and ghair mar'i, meaning it's something which is tangible, something which is intangible, something that is physical, something that is not physical, something that can be seen, not seen. So something is ritual. You're ritually impure. So somebody breaks wind, for example, they no longer have wudu. They've invalidated their wudu. They require wudu now to make worship such as praying salah, reciting, touching the Quran, etc. Making tawaf of the Kaaba in the Shafi'i school. One requires wudu now. But one is not physically impure. There's no physical impurity. This is ghair mar'i, this is intangible, this is ritualistic. However, the filth that we are speaking about here is mar'i. We are speaking about filth which is tangible, filth that can be seen. It's still shar'i, it's still legally considered filth, because it is the shara which is telling us that this is filthy. Otherwise we could not have known. It may have been something disgusting that we will think is disgusting and we don't like it, but does that make it filthy? There's plenty of things out there. Phlegm is disgusting, mucus is disgusting, but it's not filthy in the Sharia. Yeah, meaning it's not considered to be legal filth. This is why I mentioned earlier that even if it is disgusting, it does not necessarily mean that it is considered filth shar'an. So three main categories: mughalladha, mutawassita, and mukhaffafa. Mughallaza, this is the most extreme type of filth. The reason why it's called mughallaza, this kind of extreme filth, it's not a great translation for it, but meaning the most severe filth, is because the process of purification is most severe. Mutawassita, normal, average. This is a normal way of purification. Mukhaffafa, this is light. This is a very, very simple and light way of purification. So these names are given based upon the methods of purification, meaning the level of effort that is going to be exerted in the process of purification, and that will become manifest when we do that in a moment. Tayyib mughalladha, this is the saliva, sweat, urine, and excrement of pigs and dogs, and anything that scientifically comes from them. And why I say that is because, although hypothetically we would speak about, well, something being half dog and half something else, and this is of course rationally conceivable, but in science today there are all sorts of experiments that are possible, so it's even more apparent to us than it was to the earlier fuqaha, even though they wrote it in their books, highlighting that any parent, any one of the two parents for anything, if it is a dog or a pig, the same ruling applies for it, which is that its saliva, sweat, urine, and excrement will be mughalladha. In fact, even if the dog is moist due to some other reason, it's difficult for us to be able to ascertain whether there is sweat, the sweat of that dog or that pig is mixed with it. So even its hair that is moist takes the same ruling. Meaning that if I touch a dog and its hair is moist. Now this is, my hand now has najasa, which is mughalladha. And now the process of purification is very specific for this type of filth, which we will look at in a moment. Mutawassita, this essentially refers to all other kinds of filth, such as the urine of other animals and humans, save the infant, which we'll talk about in a minute. Wine is also mutawassita. It's filthy, and its method of purification is an average or a middle way. A carcass, meaning a dead animal, of, let's say, an animal that whose meat you cannot eat, or even an animal whose meat you can eat but wasn't sacrificed ritually, that this carcass is considered filth. Mazi and wadi, mazi referring to pre-ejaculative fluids or semen, but pre-ejaculative, not semen at the time of ejaculation. So that has a different. So manni, which we're going to talk about these three categories. Manni, which is the semen at the time of ejaculation. This is pure in the Shafi'i school. Madhi and wadi. Madhi meaning pre-ejaculative semen. Wadi, which is a liquid, a kind of white liquid that may come out after urine or after lifting up something heavy. This is also considered filthy within the Shafi'i school. But of what type? Mutawassita. The milk of an animal whose meat is not eaten, except for human milk, of course. Although human meat, of course, is haram, impermissible in the Sharia, but the milk of a human being is pure. Mukhaffafa, the urine of an infant boy. This does not refer to a girl, and the fuqaha have their discussions on this. But the urine of an infant boy not eating solids, and that has not reached 2 lunar years. So what this means is, any child that is below, any infant boy that is below 2 lunar years is not eating solids, not even water, only consuming milk of its own mother or of a different mother, then such a child, the child's urine will not be considered mutawassita, but it will be mukhaffafa. It's a light impurity. And so the process of purification is light also, which we'll have a look at just now. We'll go straight to that and we'll go back. So how do you purify yourself from mughalladha? Just to remind you, mughalladha is the saliva, sweat, urine, and essentially the hair of a dog and a pig, if moist, or anything that comes from both of them or one of them, is called a najasa mughalladha. And the process of purification for that, according to the hadith of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, is 7 washes, one of which is with mud mixed in, preferably the first wash. So for example, this pen has this mughallaza type of najasa on it. I have to now wash it once. It's preferable that I mix in the mud at this point, because we know mud is a good exfoliating. It's good for exfoliating from within the skin. So imagine I put some mud into the water, I mix it in, and then I wash. And it could be 1 wash, 2 washes, or 3 washes. It doesn't matter until the physical najasa, impurity, filth has been removed. Once the physical impurity has been removed, now this 1 wash has been achieved. Now I have to follow it up with 6 more washes. So it's not that I just wash it 7 times, it's that I wash it once until it's physically clean. Once it's physically clean, now I follow it up with 6 more washes. As for the fuqaha debating as to whether one can replace the mud, the mixing of the mud into the water, which of course, again, we know is actually a good method of purification. People take mud baths, or people will use these type of things to to remove from their pores things that they don't want, etc. But they debated that if it is really for cleanliness and for removing impurity from from within the thing itself as much as is possible, then surely we can replace it with soap. And so great imams such as Imam Nawawi, it's attributed, he held that position. However, the dominant position, the mu'tamad of the school, is that no, it must be mud. That mud must be mixed into the water. But in any case, this comes from the hadith of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, so we try to follow it as close as possible. In the Shafi'i school, this is wajib. This is fard, obligatory to wash it this way. In the school of Imam al-Malik, alayhi rahmatullah, the saliva and sweat of a dog is not considered to be impure. However, if you do touch a dog, or it does, brush past your clothes or whatever it may be, it's sunnah to wash in this exact method, ta'abbudan, because this is an amr ta'abbudi. It's a ritualistic act. It's an act of worship. We may not know what the wisdom is in it, but the Holy Prophet ﷺ has mentioned it, so we do it. But they don't consider it to be filthy, and therefore they don't consider the washing to be wajib, however, a sunnah. In the school of Imam Shafi'i, the dog is considered to be that this act of washing is not just ritualistic, but it's practical. And the reason why we were given it is because it must be filthy. So again, this is not but you can see the reasoning behind it. But in the Shafi'i school, it is considered to be wajib to clean and to purify in this way. If a dog licked into a container that contained a small amount of water, i.e. less than qullatain, the 2 qullas, meaning 216 liters. Now, if this happens, we know that water becomes impure. But if we add more water, and we did this mas'ala in the earlier lessons, if we add more water into it such that it goes beyond 216, then now the water, of course, becomes pure. But not the container if the container was licked. That's important. The container still has to be cleaned. Mukhaffafa, this is the light form. So this is the filth of an infant boy that is only drinking milk, not food and not even water. So in very simple terms, the water is sprinkled on the area. The scholars differed as to whether this sprinkling is after physical removal of the filth. That the physical qualities have to be removed. They can't exist, and then one can just sprinkle it with water. It's not necessary that one washes it away in the same way as mutawassita, but simply that the physical qualities cannot exist. There cannot be anything physically impure there, and then one can sprinkle water. That's a position of some of the scholars. Some of the scholars said no, that one just simply sprinkles water over it, because this filth itself is mukhaffafa, it's a light type of filth. Mutawassita, which is the most common, which is essentially every other type of filth that we typically associate to filth in the Sharia. This is human and animal urine, feces, alcohol, carcass, etc. All of these sorts of things. The purification must be with water as much as is needed. Hence the name mutawassita. This is a normal, typical, average way of cleaning something, which is that you just wash it away. Water is a condition. It must be water, pure water. But so it's not any liquid. It has to be water that is used to purify. But it doesn't matter whether it's once, twice, or thrice. As many as is needed to remove the physical filth itself. A small amount of blood or pus would be excused. Remember, blood is considered filth. It's of the mutawassita category. But it would be excused when praying. And again, this is ma'afu anhu. This concept is very beautiful in the Sharia, that some things are just so difficult and so common. We have different within the paradigm of Islamic legal thought. We have things such as al-umum al-balwa, the idea of some things being so widespread that avoiding them would be difficult. The Sharia makes dispensations and exceptions for these sorts of things. The Sharia is is very overlooking when it comes to need and difficulty. Mashaqqa plays a huge role within our Sharia. But again, the Sharia dictates a lot of the. Yani, it doesn't dictate every individual instance, but it dictates the paradigm and the principles from which we can understand, or the fuqaha can understand, mashaqqa, difficulty, and these sorts of things. It's not really for the layperson, is what I mean to say. For a layperson just to say X is difficult for me, therefore let's change the ruling. It doesn't work like that. These dispensations work within a paradigm, within a framework. Also, a living thing that does not have flowing blood, such as a fly. Again, it's so difficult. Can you imagine in a time where, even in many countries today, where you'd have to go to a well to get your water, you're going to bring your water for the entire day, for 2 days, 3 days, everybody's going to be showering, making wudu, using this for food, etc. A fly falls in, what do you do? If you were to, do you keep tipping the water out? I mean, it would make life very, very difficult. These sorts of things are very difficult to avoid. So the Prophet ﷺ told us in the hadith, well, if a fly falls into your water, just dip it in with your finger and then remove it and drink it. Why? Because in one wing has a disease of some sort, and the other wing is the shifa, is the cure. Sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Wa sadaqa alayhi salatu wasalam fima qal. Okay, so a few cases. The inside of an animal is pure. If it is an animal whose meat can be eaten and was slaughtered ritually, properly. So if you have an animal, you can eat its meat, meaning the Sharia has allowed for you to eat its meat, and it's zabiha, meaning it was ritually sacrificed, then its outward and inward are all pure. The skin, bones and organs of a dead animal, meaning a carcass, whose meat cannot be eaten, is considered to be filth, and such an animal cannot be it cannot be ritually slaughtered. And the reason for this is tala'ub with the deen. This is playing with the religion, because you cannot slaughter an animal except to eat it. Even the mas'ala will come at the bottom that you cannot slaughter an animal for its skin, for its bones. You can only slaughter an animal for its meat to eat or to feed others, and then by extension one can use its skin and bones, etc. But otherwise, the primary reason of sacrifice is to consume its meat. If one is in doubt whether the bone or skin used in making an item was from an animal that can be eaten, or whether it was slaughtered ritually or not, then one assumes it is pure unless otherwise certain. So one assumes the best, they have husn al-dhan, unless they are certain that no, this has not come from a correct source. Most wool comes from sheep shearing, which is interesting, which is done whilst the animal is alive. So we generally, when we have something wool, we assume that it's come from sheep shearing. So we assume the best, unless we are certain that it has come from a carcass that was filthy, in which case that substance is filth and we cannot use it. It is permissible to slaughter an animal that can be eaten for the sole purpose. It is impermissible to slaughter an animal that can be eaten for the sole purpose of using its skin and bones. It can only be slaughtered to eat. All else can be used as an extension of this. Vomit coming from the stomach is filth. If phlegm from the chest or mucus, then they are pure. Disgusting, albeit, but legally speaking, pure. If one was to vomit something they just ate without it reaching the stomach, then this remains pure and does not become filthy, according to Ibn Hajar, Shaykh al-Islam, and Imam al-Khatib al-Sharbini. Meaning that you eat something and before it goes to your stomach you vomit it out, this is not considered impure. And there are other rulings that come from this, which inshallah we will look at in level 2. Some scholars have said that anything that passed the middle of the throat, such as Imam al-Ramli, if it's gone past where the ha, the makhraj of the ha, then it is impure. If not, then it remains pure. Manni, madhi, and waddi. Manni, semen at the time of ejaculation, is pure in the Shafi'i school. This is not the case in the Hanafi school, but it is in the Shafi'i school. This is even the case for all animals, excluding dogs and pigs, according to Imam Nawawi. Some scholars have said that this is filth for all animals. Mutlaqan, yani unrestricted, according to Imam al-Rafi'i. Some scholars have said it is pure for only those animals whose meat is eaten. The relied upon position is that of Imam al-Nawawi. Madhi, pre-ejaculation fluid, is considered filth. Puberty is a condition, meaning it must be past the age of puberty, and then that madhi would be considered impure, filth. Waddi, a white discharge that comes sometimes after urinating or lifting something heavy, this is also considered filth. Manni, although pure, requires ghusl. So although manni is pure, it requires ghusl. So it will not technically break your wudu, but it will require you to have ghusl, which is a major ritual impurity. Madhi and waddi only require one to make wudu, meaning that manni and waddi exiting will invalidate your wudu if you had wudu, but they will not require you to make ghusl. However, of course, washing that away is necessary. So dogs and pigs, if either of them was to lick from a utensil that has a large amount of water, more than 260 liters, and that water does not decrease less than this amount due to the licking, then the water will not become impure. We've done this in the earlier lessons. Dogs are not hated in Islam, it should be mentioned. Scholars list 10 noble qualities of dogs that they share with the highest qualities of humans. The dogs of al-Kahf are pure and will enter paradise. They are not considered filth. The dogs of al-Kahf mentioned in the Quran. And I mentioned this even though I don't have time to go into the 10 qualities, but just to highlight the fact that the scholars, they wrote about the virtues of dogs. It's not that they hate the animal, it's just ritually impure. And the Sharia has done that for good reasons. We have to understand that even cats, because they eat meat, notice that Muslims only eat the meat of animals that do not consume other animals. Any animal that eats another animal, that eats meat, Muslims are not allowed to consume it. So dogs and cats, I mean, not in society in the West per se, but in most other cultures, if you throw them salami, they will eat the salami. They will eat meat. And so there's a level of distance that Muslims keep because of the filth. They're eating carcass. Those animals generally would have had dead meat, would have had filth within them that they are consuming in their mouths. So if they lick it, of course that comes out in your sweat, doesn't it? So these sorts of things, there's a wisdom behind these things, of course. But that doesn't mean that they hate the animal itself. It's just considered to be legally filth. With cats, why I mentioned cats is that, well, of course, the ruling for cats is different. I mean, why? Because they're tawafuna bil bayt. There's something that, again, in that context of the Sharia overlooks a lot, because they're so common. I mean, here in Istanbul, we have dogs that are, they are given their treatment and they are looked after, meaning that they are given jabs and stuff like that. They're defleed, etc. But they are, they're not owned by anybody. They're walking on the streets, but they won't come into your house. Whereas cats, you open your windows here, which are usually very long, particularly if you're on the ground floor, and cats are walking in all the time and they want food. So cats are tawafuna bil bayt. It's difficult to get rid of them. So the Sharia understands that, and you can have a utensil in your kitchen, a cat walks in, it licks it. What are you going to do? What are you going to do every 10 minutes of the day, 15 minutes of the day, 20 minutes of the day? So the Sharia makes dispensations, but the rule is actually one. So this requires a little bit more reflection into the ahkam of Sharia, which may Allah give us tawfiq to do. So we talked about the removing of filth. Looking a little bit at menstruation. The minimum period of menstruation in the Shafi'i school is 24 hours and the maximum is 15 days. So it doesn't mean that blood has to continue for 24 hours. There can be gaps, but collectively that blood has been there for 24 hours. If it passes 24 hours, then, meaning 2 days and 2 nights, then this woman is considered to be in hayd. Now, within the period of 15 days, unless she stops permanently, and she, takes her bath and comes out of ritual, out of hayd. And again, there are details on this, whether if she is mu'atada, if she has an ada, which we're going to have an independent class on, inshallah. There is some detail, but just in summary for this stage. But if she has what they call fatarat or naqa, which is that she has periods, meaning moments, temporary moments where she doesn't notice blood. And naqa is where she totally has no remnants of blood after doing the cotton wool test. Or fatara is where there is some remnants, but very, 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 very small. The idea is that even if those gaps exist, but then after a short while there's blood that is noticed again, experienced again, then there's a bit of a gap and then blood is noticed again. The dominant position is that all of that is considered hayd. All of that period. So even if there are some gaps, but these are not long gaps, and we're going to talk about this detail when we do an independent class on it, inshallah, because there's a lot of detail that comes with that. But essentially, all of that is considered to be hayd as long as it is within 15 days. The reason why I mention is because this detail will take a couple of hours to go through, because there are different categories of menstruating women. You have a mubtadi'a, a woman that is just beginning. You have a mu'atada, a woman that has an ada. Now, what is an ada? What is the nature of an ada? You have a muhayyara. You have a woman that's forgotten. What is she forgotten? Has she forgotten the calendar dates, meaning at what point in the month, the zaman, or the qadr, meaning the amount of days? So you have a nasiya of the qadr or a nasiya of the zaman, and you have a nasiya of both, someone that's forgotten both. So hakada you have these different mumayyiza, where you have blood which is qawi and you have blood which is da'if. Now, what are the definitions of blood which is severe and blood which is da'if? It has a whole host of detail. How do you work out the calendar dates? How do you work out the days? It comes with a lot of detail. So inshallah, we intend to have an independent lecture just on, or a lesson maybe for a number of hours, maybe a couple of lessons, just covering all of these masail with some tables, etc. according to the Shafi'i school. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq to do that. But because we are trying to stick to the level of Matn Abi Shuja, we have to move through quickly. The minimum gap between two cycles is 15 days. That's a typo. And there is no maximum. And again, there's a lot of wisdom in this, and most of this is based upon istiqra, inference. If blood is seen even once, then one assumes hayd as long as 15 days have passed since the last period. One waits a 24-hour period. If no blood, then one assumes it was irregular bleeding and makes up the missed prayers. If one has passed the minimum period, then even if temporary gaps, i.e. naqa and fatara, as I mentioned, one assumes one is in hayd until the blood stops entirely. The minimum age to be considered in hayd is 9 lunar years. I should have written there, 9 lunar years. Other than postnatal bleeding, all other kinds of blood is considered irregular. Istihada or dam fasad, meaning if it's not going to be hayd, menstrual bleeding, or nifas, postnatal bleeding, it will just be considered irregular bleeding. Sometimes the scholars call it dam fasad. If it is before 24 hours, meaning the blood was only for a couple of hours, they will call it dam fasad. If it is beyond 15 days, they will call it istihada, or beyond the ada, but again we'll talk about those details. But essentially, any blood that is not hayd or postnatal is irregular and can be called istihada. Postnatal bleeding is, of course, blood that comes after childbirth. The minimum is a single instant of bleeding, and the maximum is 60 days in the Shafi'i school. Some, of course, say 55, some say 50, but the 60 is the dominant. It is impermissible to do what when one is menstruating or in postnatal or experiencing postnatal bleeding. It is impermissible to pray, fast, recite, or touch, or carry the Quran, to make tawaf of the Kaaba, etc. These are well known. Of course, one should mention here also marital intercourse is also impermissible. There are nuances. There are situations where a woman would be able to pray and fast, recite, touch, hold, carry the Quran, but not have marital relations, and this all depends upon if she has an ada, which inshallah we will talk about when we do that lesson bi-idhnillahi subhanahu wa ta'ala. As for irregular bleeding, one makes a fresh ablution for each prayer. She is considered like a ma'adhura, like someone that has tasalsul bowl, someone that has an excuse where they are continuously dripping urine. If somebody is suffering irregular bleeding, then it's the same hukm, the same ruling, which is what? That they can't stop it. So what do? They make a fresh wudu for every prayer. Every time a new prayer comes in, your wudu, if you hadn't broken it anyway, becomes invalidated by default, and one makes a fresh wudu. They pray their fard, and they can pray any rawabit, anything from nafal and etc. that are linked to the salah. They can recite Quran. And if they don't they don't invalidate their wudu with the coming in for the next prayer, it will automatically, by default, invalidate their wudu, and they will have to make a fresh wudu for the next prayer. Wallahu subhanahu wa ta'ala a'lam. Okay, inshallah, that is all for this session, inshallah ta'ala. With that, we complete lesson 6 of Matn Abi Shuja. You have the handout with the Matn, the text in Arabic, with the English translation on the Karima al-Marwaziyya website under lesson 6. So you can check that out and you can follow it through, inshallah ta'ala, and you will notice that whatever we've discussed today, a skeleton form of it is in the Matn, and this was some discussion, some elaboration on it, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for tawfiq and for himma and for understanding. Allahumma ya Rabbal Allahumma ameen ya Rabbal Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam tasliman kathira. Jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.